So a word of introduction, and then I'm going to ask our guests to introduce themselves. I think they can do it better than I can. We do have two people from Stockholm and two people from the Netherlands, or two people from Sweden, I should say, and two people from the Netherlands. And I think our goal is to re-anchor the discussion in the European context and in the Swedish context, and maybe even in the context of this neighborhood, because there are things happening in this neighborhood that are very germane to what we're talking about here. Could I ask you, first of all, just the four of you to briefly introduce yourselves?
Okay, I'm actually one of the head bangers that Peter talked about, civil servant for 10.5 years, until I recently changed to work at an architect's office in Stockholm called OVL. My name is Fredrik Drotte.
Fredrik. I'm Bert Deteman from the Netherlands, city of Rotterdam. I'm actually not a placemaker at all. I just fell into it by accident. I'll tell you more about it. And I got very excited to it, so I'm a bottom-up guy.
I'm Helena Olsson, and I'm representing an organization that represents property owners in Stockholm. I also have a background in the City Hall of Stockholm, working with urban innovation.
Good morning. My name is Eline Hoogendijk. I work for the City of Amsterdam, especially for the Zuidas, which is a new development project on business. We have a program already running for 10 years in Zuidas on placemaking. And I also try to put it on the agenda for the city of Amsterdam to make it more known.
Great. So we have some people who are really dealing in, the front lines with these challenges, and I think it would be great to hear your response, first of all, to what you heard this morning, and how you, in your own work, see your response to these challenges that we're talking about. Maybe, Fredrik, if you could start.
Okay, it would probably be, we have a best-selling American author here today and journalist, and to oppose him in his own language would probably be suicide. But, well, to me, there are no simple villains in this, in the gentrification process. We have the governments who try, I would say. We have the capital, so to speak. We have techs, we have planners, we have the common man, or so to speak, the citizens. And there are no simple answers to why we are where we are. I think the very first question we have to ask us is, do we want a welfare society? Most people will answer, of course, yes. Then are you willing to give up, as a homeowner, for instance, the mortgage tax write-off system? Are you willing to give up things and pay for the welfare that's needed? And Sweden is one of the strongest welfare countries in the world. We have free health care, we have free education from preschool to university. But since the beginning of the 90s, since the crisis, we don't have a subsidized housing production. The policy is not there. Like Maria talked about earlier, we need the policy for it. That is one of the main projects I think we need to establish. And for that we need people, we need the citizens to actually maybe give up something in order to get that. And are people willing to do that? Are we willing to pay for the welfare that's needed? That's one of the main questions, I think.
So maybe that's part of what's known as the tragedy of the commons, the idea that it's hard for people to recognize their long-term shared interests over their short-term individual interests, and those tend to gradually win out unless there's a counter force, a civic process that is encouraging people to think otherwise. And maybe that's what we're trying to do here today. Bert, would you tell us a little bit about your work?
Yes, well, actually, I'm the director of a theater, and I came into contact with placemaking because we as a theater realized that we should step outside their threshold, not only look inwards, but also take responsibility for public spaces. Which is a big square in the city of Rotterdam. Some people think it's a very ugly square, other people think it's a very beautiful square. it was really necessary to do something about it. So we went to the municipality and we said, we'll do something about your Rotten Square. And they say, well, do it yourself. Why not? Let's do it together. And this started like 10 years ago. And it ended up in a public-private partnership that's really growing very interesting. And it's gone over into a sustainable project for a local. And it's driven by art. So it's driven by a theater, by a concert hall, by cinema. And those are the three parties that are, they are non-suspect. So artist is the portal to go there, and it's very easy to take people along and to get a goodwill from the municipality and the government as well.
Are there criticisms of the public-private partnership? I ask that because in the States we have a lot of controversy sometimes that, well, really this is a way for the private interest to essentially get control over some of the public resources.
Well, this is why it's so good to start with art, because it's not a private enterprise. In the Netherlands, at least, it's not. It's mostly subsidized. And if, for instance, a market party would start asking or start an initiative, they will also be like, well, how does it work? What do you want? What's your model? And if our theater, for instance, wants to talk to an alderman, you just grab the phone and you say, hi, can we arrange something? And it can. And it was really a cooperation between the cultural institutions, the people who live around the square, and the entrepreneurs all together that started up this project and started out as programming on the square. So, yeah, I think it's the other way around. It's easier to start this way.
Helena?
Well, first of all, I want to thank all three speakers for really good, brain good. We can have these conversations all day, I think. I'd like to comment on take some kind of positive approach to this. What we have, actually, I'm glad that you mentioned what happened like half a decade ago with the modernism, when all that planned segregation, not just in functional segregation, but also in social economic aspects. By then, the big idea was to separate. That was the good society, and thank God we today see that that people meet from different perspectives, and we have a mix of things is really good. And I think that placemaking is a good tool to actually do things to that do good to things that we are like in heritage from before, to do better things today in what is already built, and for example. And also I think we also have a positive development with ideas that no matter if you're a placemaker or a property owner or a developer, if those that do successful things know that it's people that makes the attractiveness, and you have to, if you focus on people, you have a good project in the end, because if you people makes things attractive, then you get good solutions afterwards.
So how do you see in your own work these challenges playing out? Are there specific things that you work on?
Yeah, one example is a couple of years ago we made a manual for tactical urbanism, and starting points for that was that our CEO and actually he's a very known actor in Sweden, Måns Herngren. That actor stayed in Stockholm, but he said, we also have an apartment, me and my wife, in Berlin, and we are mainly in Berlin because people are like doing so much things in the spaces between the houses, and it's there's so much enthusiasm and initiatives.
A lot of tactical urbanism there. Right?
Exactly, and so Billy, my CEO, he said, well, do something yourself then, because in Sweden we do have a heritage that if people like to engage in something or have an idea, you put like a medborgarförslag, which is like a community ID to the local municipality, and then they have this decision, is this a good idea or not? And usually it's like, you know, you have an idea and you want someone else to do it, and someone else won't do it, so nothing happens. So how can we actually make it easier for people to do something themselves? So that was the... Then we went from that idea to a process that we finally made this manual. And it was also based upon that Stockholm City had said that they wanted to encourage those kinds of initiatives. And they also had like people working with that. So we also involved the city in this process. But then, even though they had like, everyone wanted this, it was still like, you will have a problem because the structure is, if the tax or the taxes
Yeah.
for making this, to rent like the public space, it will be on commercial grounds and not on idealistic grounds. So if you want this for a month, you should pay like loads of money. And we said, that will not be the case. So, but we did it anyway. And then when we got this, when it was like 2 weeks before we were building this pop-up park, where it was, the transportation manager said, oh, okay, you have to pay this big amount of money, and we can't do that. So, and then he found like an exception to the rule that said religious religious congregations, then you don't have to pay this full tax. So he said, yeah, you can't sell anything on this. And that was not the plan. So he actually was very progressive in that aspect. And so it all went very good. And actually, it wasn't that far from the truth, because that there was a lot of, it was a very high energetic group that actually built this park and filled it with activities. And it was the local community, the businesses or the companies that worked around the place, they filled it with free like dumpster markets and such things. So it was actually quite religious. Everyone was working for this higher goal. So and then the city of Stockholm changed the rules. So now it's possible to do these kinds of initiatives in much lesser, to pay much less for it. So it was an interesting experience, but it also, on the other hand, as this was in the city of Stockholm, it was not in the outskirts where social, economic areas.
Well, I think Frederick has had some experience also in the smaller cities and
yeah, but also if you want to do this, it is kind of these people that is gathered in this room or that do this sort of initiatives anyway. So we have a lot of things to work with to make it easier for people that not have the connections or the facilities to do this, even though it's on idealistic.
Yes, I think so. That has to be an all-inclusive process.
Exactly.
Everybody has to be involved.
And we're not there yet, unfortunately.
So jumping back to the Netherlands again, Elena, your experience, how would you tell us about what you're doing?
What I'm working on and also struggling on for many years already is really related to what Maria told. I think it's really a work, it has to be on the agenda, really work it out, and I have to learn to think like a project manager. Because we're placemakers, we always start doing things. Let's go, let's let's make it better. Let's get it together. And what I did was, there was like 15 goals. It was like 15 by 15 program. It gave us 15 goals for the 5 years, 2010, 2015. So then this was really on the agenda. And then me and my team, we were really learning how the project managers work, how their Excel world is working. Because if I'm not going to be in it, if I'm like, oh, nice, we're going to have a party, and we're programming, and it's going to be a nice place, and we have to do more green. So put it on the agenda, make it really political, because public space is so expensive and so valuable. So that was really, for me, I'm more times behind my bureau than I would love to, but I think it's worth it. It's worth to really to say, what's my role? Am I programming? Am I the initiator? Or am I the facilitator? As a government, you're probably most of the time a facilitator. But you have to really make your role seriously and really find out what makes it better and makes it also sustainable, so you're not going to be in the wheel, like Maria told. I think that's most part of my work, to put it on the agenda, get the money where it has to be. We also set up an organization in Zuidas, which is called Hello Zuidas, community building, and also the businesses and the shops and the restaurants, they pay for to be in the area, and they also pay for the programming. It's not a normal organization like area management, but it's also about sustainability, also about mobility, about liveliness. So that's more, it's getting 2.0 new organization. And also the whole group pays for the area. Another thing we did was, on a long goal, was the Vision Zuidas, which tells about 2020, 2030. And my group really made also there the agenda to put the human scale, all the things you have to do, put it on the agenda. So if they start projects at this moment, they have to talk to the placemakers. They have to involve us. It's not like, I'm running, okay, I'll have a nice thing too. No, you have to talk to us, because it's valuable for the area. This is an area which Amsterdam, some city, earns a lot of money about. And now I'm looking, how can we transfer the money all over the city, and to make it a normal process, Excel work for placemakers, to be involved in the whole process. So that's what I'm working on and struggling on every day.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. So one of the topics that came up earlier was in response to the point that I made and Peter made and others that, how does placemaking form part of the solution rather than part of the problem? And I think there is a certain amount of unfairness in the premise, and I think Peter made this point that making a place nicer in and of itself is not causing gentrification. There are underlying forces. And as Frederick said, it's not a question of people who have malevolent intent necessarily. It's people who are doing what they're doing within the rules of their system. And the system is working in a way that is causing these perverse outcomes that we need to recognize and do something about. So the question I want to pose to the panel, and then I'd like to open it up to the audience, is what are some of the strategies that we as placemakers, the tools, the approaches, can do not only to combat gentrification, to be part of the solution, but to create more complete, vibrant cities for all, to echo the theme of the conference. What are the specific approaches, tools, strategies that you are using or that you think are important that we should be thinking about? And I'll throw that open for anybody who wants to respond.
Well, I can try. Well, firstly, I think that there's a TED Talks that's Mayors Rule the World. I don't know if anyone has seen it, but changes happen in the small scale, and then the nations take after, usually. And I think a lot of things are done today on the local scale that are very, very good. For instance, the participation process. public participation, where the placemakers and the planners have a great and very, very important role to include people. That's a main part,
Great point,
I would say,
yeah.
as a facilitator, like you said earlier. And also that the municipalities in Sweden are now pushing forth social contracts, which is a sort of social housing in secret, sort of undercover social housing that is not promoted by the national government. So I think there's a lot of good things happen on the local level that kind of oppose the policy on the national level. But probably that's the way it needs to work. It needs to go up and down like that. So keep up that good work, and after a while it will take a hold, I think, on the national level.
We have some of that happening in the United States right now, the local level taking actions at the
Yeah,
national level.
you can see
is not.
global network of cities that have climate
Absolutely,
deals.
peer-to-peer
for
city
instance.
networks, yeah.
Yeah, so that's actually happening all the time. And in my experience as a civil servant from Upplands Väsby, a little municipality north of Stockholm, of just the public participation process is tremendous. What you can accomplish there. So don't give up. But it takes a lot of work, and it's actually not a quick fix.
No,
Not
it's
Point.
fixing
Peter,
this.
you have in your book, don't you, a comment about the importance of local participation and communities having their say. Right? And, do you have any comments or any thoughts to respond to what you've heard so far this morning?
Yeah, I mean, I think public participation is great, but I think also public education is really important because people don't even really know how to think about these issues. You know, in San Francisco, for example, it's one of the few cities where there are public ballot measures that can greatly affect city policy. So they put a public ballot measure that would have put a moratorium on development in a highly gentrifying area. They put one on that would have taxed Airbnb to pay for more public housing. And all of those initiatives, which would have helped with gentrification, were voted down by the public. So public participation is good in theory, but you also have to couple that with education that you know, teaches people how to actually stop gentrification. The other thing I'd say is that racism is a huge part is a huge problem in public participation. They did a study that showed that the support for social welfare and social housing, public housing in the United States, it went down as those initiatives reached more people of color. So people in theory are fine with things like social housing. White people in theory are fine with things like social housing until it's given to people like immigrants, right? So a lot of the new growth that's coming into cities, especially in Europe, is immigrants, and it's, you know, it's one thing to have social participation, but if the people participating are racists, then that's a problem. So education, to me, is the other side of that coin.
And that goes back to the point you made earlier that the history of the 20th century model of development has implications for race and class that are sort of built into the model, the idea that you're going to leave behind a certain percentage of the population. Mm-hmm. Other comments?
Well, I'd like to comment on participation. There's again, if you work for the government, again, you have to really figure out what the role is and what you have to offer, because now the next hyped word, I think, is going to be participation after placemaking. Because you really have to know what you're offering, what are we talking about? Are we just telling, or you really have something to say as a community, or as a neighborhood, or a street? So be clear on that. Be clear on, as a government, not go this. We open the city hall, we open the table, and we just talk. Up front, you have to know: are there advisors? Are they, in the end, if they say no, what are you going to do? As urban planners, are you going to say, okay, we change the plan? Are we so open? So be realistic about the way we talk to the society.
I think in the Netherlands we see that happening. We see that happening. It's starting to get the other way around, so people just don't wait anymore until the government decides to do something, and it just comes. If they ask with a group of people, so they have more power to ask. And I agree with you, for the local scale it's getting more and more important, and even smaller local scales. So it doesn't have to be just a city, it could be just a part of the city or just an environment that gets the spark going. And in the Netherlands, at least, I can see happening that people are really able to move governments to get into their direction. And even better, the government says, tell us what you want.
Yeah,
and
that's the way it would be very nice. Yeah.
But how do you create a kind of deliberative culture that can educate itself and can make joined-up decisions rather than simply reactive decisions that embody sometimes the worst of human instincts? And and it seems to me we as placemakers have to think pretty deeply about that question, about how to create a sort of larger civic dialogue that's informed, that doesn't just tokenistically listen, as Peter said earlier, but also empowers people, but empowers them with responsibility to think for the best interest of their community rather than they're reacting to the
Short comment to that, because our experience is that when the public participation starts, it's learning the process that makes a good public participation is very, very difficult. And one thing that you have to know is that you have to invent the words together. You can't go out there as a planner or a placemaker and use the words that you are familiar with, because you will create an alienship, so to speak, towards the ones you meet. You have to invent everything together, and then that way you include everyone in the process. So it's a lot about the way you make public participation happen. And if I can say another thing, maybe to create not so much agreement in the group, I think we should not be afraid of the private capital, because to increase supply of housing, we can use a higher amount of public funding, but we will need the private capital, because it won't happen otherwise. There's a limit to what municipalities can loan to make housing happen. We need both to happen, but we need to regulate and subsidize in some ways so that this works as a balance. But we cannot make the private capital a villain in this, because then we will not succeed.
There was a point that was brought up last night about Jane Jacobs and the point that you can have money droughts, but you can also have money floods. You can have too much money from one source, or so. Question seems to be one of balance. I'm going to get to the audience in just a moment. I want to ask Maria if you have any comments or questions for the panel, observations.
I agree with the thing about private investment and capital growth. It just is a reality. I think the only question is, how do we create rules and regulations that make sure we get the right partners in and that we have the right contract written up? So in the UK, one of the things that happens a lot is that we've possibly gone too far down the private sector route, possibly. And we don't have strong enough planning legislation that allows for the kind of social housing that we need. And that means that sometimes we have developers who will agree to a percentage, 20, 30%, but we'll end up with maybe 8 or 2, because at the end, despite a contract, we'll say we couldn't afford it. Now, I hear from my colleagues and friends in other countries that just wouldn't happen in some other countries. So we need to make sure that we have the right regulation to get the right kind of capital that allows for equality in social housing.
Can
yes. Oh, so you wanted to respond?
No, nothing like, but for last question. So go ahead, and I can.
Okay. Yes. Someone had a question here. Microphone, please.
Hi, my name is Hans from Stipo. I have a very practical question to bring it a little bit back down to the level of placemaking and what us placemakers can actually do. And I think we can benefit from your experiences. So I'm looking for some examples, really. I think placemaking, in my view, is to cater in a public space for a diverse set of needs and a diverse group of needs and a diverse set of wallets as well. Now, what we tend to do in placemaking projects is to bring in food trucks, right? And they are great, but they are only a larger group of wallets, if we can express it this way. So how can you make sure, can you give a concrete example of what it is that you're doing in your respective areas to make sure you also cater for people with smaller wallets? And how do you ensure that that is not just a one-time thing, but you make sure that you can keep doing this over the course of the next 10, 20 years in your area? I think that would be very interesting to hear from you.
Anybody want to respond to that?
Well, I think the answer lies mostly in creating public-private partnership. So it's a long-term process. It's not something that you can just start up and be ready with within a year. It might even be 10 years. But then if you create this partnership, then and you have a balance within the partnership, whether it would be a market partner, the government, or a private partner, doesn't matter, then at least one of those cannot act on its own. It has to be in balance with what happens. And the balance helps it, and the balance can be putting just a plant outside your door, or it could be like we did in Rotterdam, have an enormous flying grass carpet that's covering for a whole season the square, and it's accessible for everybody, and the municipality paid for it because it was on some green budget, and we lured the aldermen into doing this, and in the end we ended up with a beautiful square that has a summer season with people picnicking outside. And it really works. And it is because of the balance. It's not because you say to a market partner, please come up with your budget, do something about our square, do something about our neighborhood. And this is only an initiative that's for a short-term period. It's not like investing in houses, but if it generates a common feeling on how you should cope with these things. And I think that's the key, is to start there, start bottom up.
I think we will see a lot of more initiatives on that side as well, that meeting points in between houses and outside, because in an urbanized city we have to use the land more efficiently, and if land prices goes up, maybe it will be even more important to create those spaces that people can meet outside, not in shops and that thing. So I think not the least, like art and cultural activities will start to be more in the common areas, and because we just have to, and because there is people want to make those places, but I think it's just started. So I think pop-up parks will develop as more permanent places that are facilitate other activities inside it.
It's a stepping stone.
Yes, and can I also make a comment on what, I mean, we are property owners, and there is. I am thinking a lot about how can we, if we do this nice things with an area, and we do we know that our art galleries and stuff, and the artists are moving in and how the gentrification process, we are familiar with that way, but how can we find new models or economic models to actually not when it's time to redevelop or anything, you have to raise rents, and how can we find new ways to actually have tenants there left, that they can stay there in these areas. I think one big thing is that we have to mix old and new, so therefore infills and densities can be seen as a possibility to actually naturally have different kinds of rents in an area, and both on housing side but also on the commercial side, so actually the structure is changing, so you can actually have different a new mix in the area. I think that is really important to make that possible, because back in the old days we have a lot of areas that are developed all at the same time, and then you have all the same life cycles in the buildings, and you have a decade ago. Now it's time for them to like redevelop, and then you have to think about that. Save some old buildings, so not you just redo all things at the same time.
Yeah, and I think the idea that Jane Jacobs brought this up also, that you need to make sure that the owners are part of the equation, because ultimately it's in their interest to have diversity too long term. It's not economically sustainable for anybody to have these monocultures that, you know, result in stagnation and unsustainable development. So I think I had a couple of comments.
Well, that's nice that like the organization Hello Zuidas, which I mentioned, which is public and private money, and they're sustainable, they're programming every year all over. So the government is always temporary on a place. Because later on, when Zuidas is developing is going to be lower, then we as civil working for Amsterdam will go to another place. So they'll be sustainable in the area. And as a government, we started up concerts in a public space. We started up art in a public space. But we're not going to do this forever because we don't have the money. So the organization, which is private money and public money, more private money going all the way up, public money is saving down in the end. And they do things also for the neighborhoods around, because Zuidas is an expensive area, but the neighborhoods around us are just old neighborhoods where there's people living, also children living, and then the money also goes to them. So it's really follow the money the private part, which really helps the area, but also the area around it. And they're programming, and they will be in the area for a long time. So if you make like I don't know if you can make it for neighborhoods, but probably I think so. If you look at the American models. You can make also organizations which stay and they know what's going on and what's happening. So the government can pay money, also the shops and the restaurants, and so that's I think that we have to work on.
So
follow that money.
I'm sorry that we're almost out of time. We have time for just one more question.
Yes, I'm Femke Hakau, also from the City of Amsterdam. I'm working for the innovation team. I really like the discussion that it's not about inclusiveness alone, it's about diversity, because when it's about inclusiveness, it's excluding also a lot of people. Trying to get to that diversity, I also was wondering, but the discussion in the panel was already heading that direction, is about, yes, we have private parties and public parties, but isn't it time that we rediscover the collective? Like the common ground in the UK and well, in the Netherlands, we also had these common grounds where a different form of collaboration also was inside the community. Only one mistake was made, that it wasn't a part of the law. And I'm not aware about this entirely, but I know that there were some flaws made by when our previous parents wrote the first law books, that they tend to forget how to arrange the collective. So actually my question is, how can we do that? Can we reinvent the collective in how we organize it, as well as private partners, as well as public partners, as well as citizens? And what do we need to do for that? So maybe a broader question.
One very concrete way to do this is the Baugemeinschaften. I don't know if you're Bygggemenskaper. To invite people to actually build for themselves is a collective way to invite people into the production of society, which from the German examples, and Dutch as well.
Their corporations.
It is an established systems, brings in a lot of sustainability issues as a bonus.
Yes.
We don't have it in Sweden yet, I would say. There is some collective housing project, but not for real. So that's one concrete aspect.
On that note, let's thank the panel, and we look forward to one more person. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. We do have a new act called the Community Rights, which allows communities to actually put their name down. So if a particular space or building is important to them as a community, they are first on the list should it be sold. So that's a really interesting way of getting community ownership, because quite often those communities will buy or purchase a land or building. So that's one way of doing it. The other one is community trusts, foundations, which encourage people, as you said, ordinary folks, as ordinary as you can be, to afford to get together and buy spaces. And that's happening quite a lot as well.
It's good for the lunch, I think, right?
Okay, thank you very much. Let's continue this conversation, and I hope you'll all be looking at it.
Thank you.
Thank you.